So, welcome to the new video of like we are in the third phase of respiration. Okay, the third video of respiration. So we will starting about the regulation of respiration. So talking about the regulation of respiration is divided into two types. Okay, just two types, not a headache. So the first type is chemical regulation and the second is neural regulation. Very much simple. So now what happens is in chemical, we will start about the chemical regulation. So chemical regulation, let me just write the heading. Remember, chemical regulation is pretty much very simple. You have to just remember three things. Okay, chemical regulation is caused by CO2, H plus and O2. Okay, where the CO2 and H plus are CNS regulator. Okay, CNS regulatory mechanism. They are included in the CNS regulatory mechanism, while the O2 is the peripheral receptor. Rather than saying CNS regulatory mechanism, we can also say, I will just mention it in the brackets, it is the central chemoreceptor. Okay, and about the O2, it is the peripheral chemoreceptor. Okay, so I will write it in a chart format. So just a second. This is CNS regulation by CO2 and H plus. Okay, and on the other side, just a second, I will just divide the page. What is this happening? Okay, and on the other side, it is the peripheral chemoreceptor O2. Okay, so starting with the central CNS regulation, so the CNS regulation by CO2 and H plus. So remember, if there is increased ventilation, but increased ventilation, the O2 is less than CO2. Okay, in the blood the O2 is less than CO2. So let's take a condition at the first increase CO2. Okay, in blood. Okay, so what will happen, this CO2 will combine with H2O to give H2CO3. Okay, and further this H2CO3 will break and give us H plus plus HCO3 minus. Now this H plus which is formed, it will go to brain. Okay, and since it is going to brain, it acts as a chemoreceptor and it stimulates the respiratory area, and therefore the increase in respiration, so decrease in the CO2 concentration will occur, so the respiration will be regulated. Okay, but there's a twist. When it goes to brain, it has a very little effect. Okay, why a very little effect in regulatory mechanism? Because the H plus, it finds difficult to cross the blood brain barrier. Okay, so H plus has a little effect or not a major direct effect in the regulatory mechanism, the chemical regulatory mechanism of respiration. Okay, though it combines with like the CO2 combines with H2 and gives H2CO3, and H plus is formed by H2CO3. The H plus goes to the brain, but it has no a direct major effect. Okay, but a major effect is caused by CO2. Okay, so let's take another condition. So increase partial pressure of CO2 of blood. Okay, so if there is increased partial pressure of CO2, okay, so what happens is the partial pressure of CO2 increases in CSF2. Okay, so what happens, this H2O which is in the CO2 and which is in the CSF, and the CO2 which is now present in the CSF in more quantity will combine with they both will combine and form H2CO3. Now this H2CO3 breaks and gives us H plus plus SCO3 minus. Now this H plus which is now present in the CSF need not to cross the blood brain barrier, and therefore it is in the brain, and then it has a strong effect as it is in CSF. Okay, the second condition where H plus is directly in the brain, it will have a stronger effect. Okay, and we have said a major direct effect is of CO2. So now tell me one thing, if there is increase partial pressure of CO2, let me just extend it till here, in CSF, okay, or blood, so what will happen, the CO2, it doesn't find it difficult to cross blood brain barrier, so it is a direct stimulator. So if there is an increased amount of partial pressure of CO2, it will directly go to the brain, and then it will stimulate the respiratory centers, and we see increase in inspiration or increase in expiration depending upon the condition. Okay, now this was all about the chemical regulation of CNS by CO2 and H plus. So what happens, H plus combines with, the condition is increased CO2 in blood. So if increase CO2 in blood, CO2 combines with H2O, it gives H2CO3. Further, this H2CO3 splits into H plus and HCO3 in the blood itself, and from the blood it goes to the brain. Okay, but the H plus finds it difficult to cross the blood brain barrier, and therefore not a major direct effect of H plus is observed. The second condition is increased partial pressure of CO2 in blood, therefore increased partial pressure of CO2 in CSF, therefore this H2O will combine with CO2 in the CSF, then we will see the formation of H2CO3 in the CSF itself, then this H2CO3 will further split in the CSF and gives rise to H plus and HCO3 minus. This H plus which is in the CSF now will go directly to the brain, no need to cross the blood brain barrier, and it will cause a stronger effect. Okay, and the third condition is directly increase in partial pressure of CO2, whether it is in blood or whether it is in CSF. This CO2 will directly cross the blood brain barrier, it does not find it difficult to cross the blood brain barrier, and it acts as the direct stimulator. So that was about the chemical regulation by CO2 and H2 H plus. Okay, so now starting with the peripheral chemoreceptor, that is O2. Okay, so while starting the topic of regulation of respiration, so why do we need to regulate respiration? So basically the classical definition, or the we are learning from the childhood, the definition of respiration is exchange of gases. Okay, exchange of gases is basically exchange of CO2 and O2. So if there is increased CO2 in our body, it will be more toxic. Okay, and if there is decreased oxygen in the body, it will lead to hypoxic condition, and therefore the metabolic process will not occur. We have seen the Bohr and the Halden effect. Okay, so talking about the peripheral chemoreceptor, that is O2. So basically, what will stimulate what will stimulate the central receptors, like the chemoreceptor, peripheral chemoreceptor, to regulate respiration? Like the O2 condition will increase and it will stimulate, or it will decrease and it stimulate. Yes, O2 condition, if decreased, it will stimulate. Okay, so basically we have to bring the respiration back to normal. So this peripheral chemoreceptor, which is oxygen, okay, so basically the chemoreceptor are present in two locations. Okay, the locations are aortic bodies and carotid bodies. Okay, now what happens if there is low oxygen condition? Okay, low oxygen conditions, the herring from carotid bodies, herring nerve, okay, and the herring nerve from the carotid bodies and the vagus nerve from the aortic bodies, they act as the afferent nerve. Okay, the herring from the carotid bodies and the vagus from the aortic bodies, they act as the afferent nerve. Okay, and they go to the brain. Okay, they have a little effect on respiration. Okay, but in the cellular effect, what happens if decrease O2? Okay, so basically in the cells there are glomus cells. Okay, these glomus cells, if there is decrease in O2, they increase K plus concentration in glomus. Okay, the glomus cells increase K plus concentration in itself. So what happens? There is increased calcium. Okay, then increase neurotransmitters, the ATP, the acetylcholine. Okay, and this acetylcholine, the ATP, the neurotransmitter, when increased, they go to the brain, and we see a major effect on respiration. Okay, so we will write it in a kind of flow chart. Okay, so just a second. Now I will suggest to draw this diagram with me. It is very important diagram, a very conceptual diagram. Then okay, so let's say there is decrease O2 in the artery. This is the artery, this is the glomus cell. Okay, glomus cell, and this is the afferent fiber. Okay, I will write the flow chart. First write this diagram, try to draw this diagram. So there is decrease O2. Okay, first we will go to the glomus cell. Okay, so decrease O2, it will stimulate the glomus cells. So what will the glomus cell do? So basically, just a second. So the K plus concentration in the glomus cell. So this K plus channel, basically what happens, increase in K plus concentration of the glomus cells. Okay, mind it, it is the glomus cell. Just a second, it will create some confusion. So K plus cell in the glomus cell increases, but the K plus channels are close. Okay, then increase in K plus concentration in glomus cell. Okay, but K plus channels are close, so depolarization occur. So this depolarization, further what will it do? It will open the calcium channels. Okay, and it will lead to influx of calcium. Okay, influx of calcium. Okay, since depolarization occur, Ca plus 2 increases. This, what will it do? Just a second. It will further increase the neurotransmitter, the ATP. Okay, neurotransmitter ATP. Like for example, these are the neurotransmitter. Okay, so they are going like this. So neurotransmitter will be increased due to this calcium, and also the ATP will be increased. Okay, since the neurotransmitter are increasing, for example the ACTH, to be more specific, ACTH, this ACTH will go to this afferent fiber and further it will go to the CNS. So this is the procedure where the glomus cell is stimulated due to decreased oxygen. Okay, now I will write the flow chart. Okay, now decrease oxygen. Okay, then what happens? Chemoreceptors are stimulated. Then what happens? Afferent from vagi, just a second, afferent from vagi and afferent from aortic and carotid bodies. Okay, so I'm not writing the name of the afferent. You very well know aortic has vagus and carotid has herring. So yes, we have written here carotid has herring and aortic has vagus. So afferent from aortic and vagi to brain. Okay, and there is respiratory regulation. Now, what is the cellular effect? Cellular effect is basically decreased O2, stimulation of glomus cell. Then what happens? K plus concentration increases in glomus cells. Okay, then what happens? Depolarization. Okay, increase in calcium channels, release of neurotransmitter, I'm writing NT, ATP. Okay, and then ACTH also, it also comes under the neurotransmitter, but I am writing it separately. And then it goes to the brain and respiratory regulation. So basically I will mark a box for everybody because the flow chart is a bit like it can confuse a bit. This is the cellular effect. Okay, so basically I will just highlight this part. Okay, let me just okay, so this is the cellular effect and the other is the normal, like the normal conditions. Normal conditions, it is not a normal condition, but basically the overview of how the respiration is regulated by O2 concentration, okay, by the afferents. Now this is the cellular effect. I will also write it. Okay, cellular effects. So one more point I would like to add, I will write it here in the heading itself. This CNS regulation is a slow response, while the peripheral chemoreceptor, the O2, is the fast response. Okay, okay, so this was all about the regulation, the chemical regulation part. Okay, basically this table and the flow chart will help you. So now coming to the neural regulation. So basically this is a diagram showing the pons and the medulla and the fourth ventricle as well. Okay, just let me highlight the fourth ventricle. It is not important for us, but okay, as it is drawn it must be highlighted. Okay, so this, what is the green structure, the blue structure and the red structure? So basically this is the pneumotoxic center or the pneumo, just the second, pneumotoxic pneumotaxic center. What is this red and the blue structure? So basically the red structure, which is more located ventrally, it is the ventral respiratory group of neurons, or simply we say it as VRG. Then what is this blue structure? Since it is more dorsally, it is named as dorsal respiratory group of neurons, or we simply call it as DRG. Okay. Then one center also is located here. Let me just show it as a dotted structure. It is the apneustic center. Okay. So to describe the neural regulation of respiration, this diagram is important. Like the structure should be more clear. Why are they? What are their importance? We will discuss further. Okay. Now I will discuss the neural regulation in form of a diagram. Okay, or specifically a flow chart. Okay. So let me just draw it with me. It is very easy. So since this pneumotaxic center is present in the pons, okay, so this area is the pons. Okay, so I will write it first as pons. Okay, and what is present in the pons? The pneumotaxic center. Okay, the pons is present in the pneumotaxic center. Okay, now the medulla. So what is present in the medulla? Yes, the dorsal respiratory group and the ventral respiratory group. So I will simply write it as DRG, okay, and VRG. Okay. Now the ventral respiratory group is basically inactive in normal ventilation. Okay, what happens is the pneumotaxic center is continuously inhibiting, or it limits the signals which are going to the DRG, okay, the dorsal respiratory group. Okay, so basically the function of the pneumotaxic center is to limit respiration. Okay, so one concept I will like to share. Just a second, I will write limits RAMP signals. So what are these RAMP signals? So basically when the DRG, the dorsal respiratory group, which is involved in normal inspiratory procedure, okay, so what happens is the signal for inspiration is sent by the diaphragm. Okay, is sent by the diaphragm. Okay, since it is sent by the diaphragm via the vagus and the glossopharyngeal, okay, the nerves. So what happens is the signals for inspiration by the dorsal respiratory group of neuron is not like, it is not directly given. Okay, like for example, like it is not a sudden signal. The signal keeps on increasing and reaches to a peak, and therefore it goes like increasing, like it goes like an increasing signal to the diaphragm, and thus inspiration occur. It is not like a specific quantity of impulse is gone to the diaphragm, it simulates. It increases simultaneously going to the diaphragm, and then it increases. So these are the RAMP signals, okay, which increases, okay, not with a burst but with time. Okay, these are the RAMP signals. And the pneumotaxic center, it limits the RAMP signals. It never completely inhibits, but it limits RAMP signals. Okay, Now the dorsal respiratory group. The dorsal respiratory group is basically consist of eye neurons. And what does this eye neurons do? This eye neurons acts on the diaphragm, and if required the external intercostal. And what is the action of these muscles? Yes, the action of the muscles is basically inspiration. Okay, contraction of this muscle, inspiration. So basically the eye neurons are the motor neurons or the efferents. Inspiration. Now coming to the function of ventral respiratory group. We said that the ventral respiratory group is basically inactive during the normal respiration. Now the ventral respiratory group basically it involves in expiration. Okay, a forced expiration kind of thing. Okay, but tell me one thing, when we breathe normally, okay, what is the factor which we have learned that expiration is like passive process. Okay, so what is the factor which causes expiration, normal expiration? Yes, the elastic recoil by the lungs. But if there is a forced inspiration, the expiration also needs to control. So the DRG stimulates the VRG in this case. Okay, the VRG has two types of neurons. Okay, it consists of the I neurons also and the E neurons also. Okay, now when we inspire forcefully, okay, this I neurons, just a second, let me just shift it here. I neurons will stimulate the E neurons, okay, and the E neurons will further stimulate the I neurons. Okay, this is the cyclic process. This I neurons, we know it cause inspiration, in this case a little forced inspiration, and this E neurons will further cause expiration. Okay, now the diaphragm external intercostal also relaxes and then it causes expiration. Okay, just let me write here relaxation, it will give you a hint. Okay, and this causes expiration. Now there are some mechanoreceptors which controls the rate of inspiration. So what are they? So basically it is a vagus. This vagus basically it takes signals from the inspiratory muscle, and basically this vagus acts as the afferent as well as it controls a bit respiration. It stimulates the pneumotaxic center, it limits the RMP signal, and thus the respiration is controlled. So this was the flowchart I was trying to explain. Okay, so this was all about the neural regulation of respiration. See this flowchart once again, then we will get to know the exact functioning of the neural regulation. Also we have talked about the apneustic center. So this apneustic center basically it increases rate of respiration. Now for increasing the rate of respiration, what it must do? It must stimulate the DRG. Okay, so basically the apneustic center it stimulates the DRG. Sorry, the name is apneustic center as given in Guyton. Okay, let me just mention it here too. So basically it stimulates the dorsal respiratory group and thus it increases the rate of inspiration and therefore it increases the rate of respiration. This was all about the regulation mechanism of respiration. Okay, we saw about the chemical regulation, okay, the table, the diagram, the flow chart, and about the neural regulation, the flow chart too. So thank you.